everyone. My name is Stephanie Griffin, and I'm a composer violist based in New York City. I'm originally from Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada, but I've been here in New York for the past 27 years. My background is pretty much entirely as a player. I'm a self-taught composer, and I come to composition from the perspective of a violist. In fact, my entire viola playing career, which if you count my childhood is actually 40 years, pretty much, it was 40 years in September, I have been also an improviser. I'm not exactly sure how I started improvising, but my theory is I started right away because when I was playing viola in the Vancouver City public schools, I was practicing all the time, and if I wasn't improvising, I don't know what I was doing up there in my room because I only had 45-minute group lesson once a week. Half of the time is spent tuning the kids' instruments. Anyway, so as an improviser, I had the joy of working with Butch Morris, who was a major influence on me, Wadada Leo Smith. Recently, I got to play with Henry Threadgill. I did a lot of big conduction projects with people, and I never really took ownership of my creativity as a musician until I went to Music Oh My in the year 2014. There, I had the courage to actually pen my first composition. It was a composition that involved improvisation, a graphic score, in fact, that I developed further after I left Oh My, and it became the piece that I now call Music in Two Parts for Three Improvisers. About a year after my residency at Music Oh My, I was offered my first commission. My friend Daniel Good, who's a downtown composer and clarinetist living in Soho, invited me to write a piece for multiple violas for his flexible orchestra project. I almost immediately said no. But then I said to myself, Stephanie, what are you doing? You've been an improviser pretty much your, whole viola playing life. You've worked with so many downtown composers in an improvisational context where you've basically been providing your own creativity for other people's music. But now you don't have the courage to put your own name on your own creativity. So all of this was just rushing through my head for about 20 seconds or so. And then I said, yes. And on my way home, I was elated. I had just accepted my first commission. But after celebrating this fact, the panic set in. How am I going to do this? I've never written a fully notated piece for non-improvising musicians. So as I started strategizing, I realized there was no way I was going to be able to do this unless I went away somewhere in the summer when I'm less busy. Because, during the regular concert season, I'm playing with my group, the Memento Quartet, all these different new music groups, orchestras, all sorts of other projects as a viola player. I just simply wouldn't have the space to take on this new challenge. I started looking into residency spaces, and unfortunately I was too late. I was too late to find anything, all the applications were closed. And as luck would have it, I was offered a gig in Maui, that summer. And I have friends in Honolulu, Cha Smith and Colleen Kelly, who I'd met on a Momenta Quartet trip there. So I called them up and I asked, sheepishly, could I perhaps stay with you for a week or two after my gig in Maui? And they said, well, why don't you stay for 5? We're going to go to Europe and we need a dog sitter. So I took on my first ever dog sitting gig and had my self-styled residency at their beautiful home in Honolulu, overlooking the water. In fact, the sound of the waves from their lanai was a major inspiration for the whole beginning section of the piece and, the feel of the piece in general. Since I'd never written a fully notated composition before, a friend of mine, Daniel Thomas Davis, suggested that I start by multi-tracking myself. My friend Gordon Bieferman taught me how to use Reaper, which is recording software, and I did that, and I used that technique to kind of generate the material that eventually became the piece Poem from Exile for 7 violas. This piece was later choreographed by Tiffany Mills. It was the first time a choreographer has actually worked with me as a composer, so that was a major milestone for me. And the performance video that you're going to see is from National Sawdust, recent performance in December 2023 with the Tiffany Mills Dance Company. after having the courage to write Poem from Exile, I decided to revisit another pet project that I had come up with probably about 15 years prior. I had been walking up Broadway in the Upper West Side where I lived at the time, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw a book from one of the booksellers there with a beautiful pencil drawing of a string quartet on the cover. So I turned back and took a look at this book, and it was this really gorgeous children's book called The Lost String Quartet by N.M. Bodecker, which I found out later was out of print. While I was reading this book on the street, I was just immediately came up with this idea that at some point I would love to produce a children's theater piece with my own string quartet, the Momenta Quartet, as players and actors. And all I would need to do would be to find a composer to write the score and a dramaturg and actor to narrate the story. I bought the book, I read it a few times, I started sketching ideas and kind of forgot about it for a while. So then, of course, after having had my first premiere of my fully notated piece for 7 violas, I was on a trip in Mexico City with my quartet, and I happened to meet Fernando Villaproal. He was in the audience at a loft concert that we did there. He's an actor and dramaturg, has his own little theater company. We immediately hit it off, and we had coffee together, and he told me that a lot of what he did to make a living was, physical comedy and children's theater. I didn't really think twice about it, and then I got back home in New York City, and I just was looking at my bookcase, and I saw the spine of the book that I had purchased, The Lost String Quartet. I picked it up again and looked at it, and I was like, oh my goodness, Fernando might be my man. So I scanned the book and emailed it to him. He was super excited, and we started planning. Of course, I still needed to find a composer. Then I realized it was time to stop outsourcing my own creativity and just write the thing myself. So I started fundraising for about a year. Fernando and I had meetings about once a month on Skype, and would discuss the libretto. He kind of came up with the libretto. We decided on which parts to include and not include. And once we had the funding in place, we did a little workshop with my quartet, and they were very courageous and willing to take physical comedy lessons with an actor that Fernando had met in Mexico but lives here in New York City, Hilary Chaplin. We had a really great time doing that. Some of the piece had to be memorized, and as someone that plays a lot of new music all the time, I really don't like memorizing things. I feel like my hard drive is kind of full. So a lot of the composition was based around when we could have music in front of us, and if we did have to memorize it, it would have to be sort of simple. So I did use some graphic notation. There's no actual improvisation in the piece, but there was a lot of graphic notation. The story, in a nutshell, is the string quartet trying to get to a gig in the winter. Everything goes wrong. They have a car crash, and bit by bit, they all lose their instruments. They come running into the gig, and they're basically just playing this concert anyway with whatever objects they found on the trip. So this little excerpt that you're going to see is that. It's actually the junk, I call it the junk quartet. It's kind of a silly thing, but I hope you enjoy it. And there's, of course, some other parts of the piece where we do play our instruments, but I think Michael, the cellist, loses his instrument about 5 minutes into it. So a lot of the piece involves car doors, the tire of Orpheus, you will see, Alex Shiozaki playing the tire of Orpheus. I am playing my viola was swallowed by a boa constrictor, so that's the viola constrictor you see.
Oh, guys, you're here. Yeah. Yes, they have arrived. They are here. Well, ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause for the Momenta Quartet.
So as you can see, I'm interested in drama. I love the theater. I've always loved opera as well, and I've not yet written an opera, but that's something on the slate that I really, really want to do. But I managed to write my first vocal piece in 2019. Again, I wasn't really thinking about writing a piece for this concert, but my quartet had been invited to Williams College for a concert including a number of guests. We were doing the Copeland Sextet for string quartet, piano, and clarinet. And the composer Ileana Perez Velasquez also had a piece for those instruments plus soprano. So she was very encouraging to me all along when I started composing, and she said, "Stephanie, why don't you write a piece for this concert?" And I said, "You know, the quartet's very, very busy right now, and we're playing like every piece on this concert. Maybe I could write a piece for the three guests." And so I asked the three guests. It was Sharon Harms, soprano. It was Benjamin Fingland on clarinet and Christopher Oldfather, the pianist. And I said, "Would you guys be interested and willing to play a short song if I wrote it for this concert?" And they all said yes. They were super encouraging. And I started thinking about it. And just then I realized that I had just selected the instrumentation for Franz Schubert's famous piece, The Shepherd on the Rock. Because I like puns, I was thinking, oh, well, I'm not going to write The Shepherd on the Rock. Maybe I'll write The Leopard on the Block. So I started Googling poems about leopards. And if you ever do Google poems about leopards, it's actually pretty slim pickings. I was quite surprised. Such a noble animal, but very little poetry celebrating it. But I did come across the perfect poem called The Leopard by Lorenzo Thomas, who's an Afro-Panamanian composer. He's actually since passed away. He'd already passed away when I'd found the poem. But anyway, I loved the poem, and what was great about it is it really wasn't about a leopard at all. It was about a woman walking down the street in a leopard skin-tight leopard skin suit, and all the men sort of catcalling her. So I've spoken a little bit about song and theater and improvisation. Generally, as a composer, I'm very inspired by working with artists from other media. And as a violist, many, many times I've had the opportunity of working with choreographers, and I've really enjoyed that. I worked with the Chinese-American choreographer Yin Mei, both in a score by the Indonesian composer Tony Prabowo, but also once in a piece that was pretty much entirely improvised. I used to live in a big loft in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, and one of my loft mates was Stephanie Sleeper, and we did a whole show together where I kind of curated some of my favorite solo viola pieces, and kind of we developed that together. So that was sort of a creative thing, but it wasn't my own music. Once I started solidly composing, I developed a relationship with the choreographer who's also Canadian, living in Jersey City, Samina Mita. She has her own company called Mean Moves. I really love her work, and again, it's a theme. I met her because of the Momenta Quartet. We were invited to do a piece of hers using John Adams' Book of Alleged Dances. Samina and I became friends, and she started listening to my music online, and she invited me to work with her. We had a project that we were working on that got interrupted by the COVID-19 pandemic. It was originally going to be about the power of women, and it was called FE, which the power of women and also the element of iron. I started working on it, and it was going to be for 3 female voices and viola. There's always a viola. I don't know why. And then, of course, COVID happened. We kind of worked remotely. She choreographed the whole thing to a metronome and had a very elaborate chart of the rhythms and tempos that she wanted. And I started working from there. And then I decided I really couldn't think of a text. We didn't have a writer involved. And I spoke with Samina. I said, why don't we make this instrumental? And what I really wanted to do, instead of 2 sopranos and a mezzo-soprano and viola, was 2 oboes, clarinet, and viola. And to my knowledge, I don't think there's much music out there for that combination. I am very happy with how it sounds. It's a really interesting combination. I worked on it. I took what I'd already written for the voices and adapted it to the instruments. I got together with the musicians. Kathy Halverson, who I've known for a very long time, the oboist, gave me a lot of really great tips on the oboe, and I showed her some sketches. Ben Fingland, clarinet, I'd already worked with on Beautiful You Are song cycle, and of course the original song, The Leopard. And I went away with that and had a lot of rehearsals with the dancers and made a lot of changes based on kind of audible cues that they were going to need. And came up with a piece in this very organic way with Samina, which we premiered on February 28th, 2023, in the same concert at America Society where my song cycle was premiered. This excerpt is the opening of that piece, which now is going to become part of the next big project that Samina and I are going to do. We're now working towards a full-length dance piece called Come September, which is going to also utilize texts from a lecture by Arundhati Roy called Come September. We hope to premiere this piece in September 2025, so stay tuned. But meanwhile, you can see a little bit of this excerpt of the original piece, which I have called For Samina. all for watching this video and for listening to my music. If you're interested, I hope you'll check out some of the entire pieces. They're all on YouTube. And I also wanted to say thank you to John Gurin for filming and editing this video, and to Amy Frawley and all the wonderful staff at Composers Now for inviting me to make this. I hope you enjoyed getting to know my music, and I hope to see you at some point at a concert and meet you sometime soon.